what would be like your biggest advice that you would pass along to anyone doing an equity crowdfunding campaign?
Besides do it on WeFunder.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Adventure Capital. Today we've got on the Chief Grain Officer, the CEO of ReGrained, Dan Kurzrock. ReGrained repurposes food waste from beer, all through the power of technology and culinary science. Enjoy the episode.
So, Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Johnny and Katie. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great to have you.
Maybe let's get started with an overview of Dan Kurzrock and ReGrained. Give us the founding story of what you've built.
Yeah, happy to, and happy that several years of the story now have kind of intersected with our relationship with WeFunder. We started this business actually, it's over 10 years ago now that came up with the concept. I was a home brewer. I learned how to brew beer at age 19. Now, Johnny, I know you're not from this side of the pond, but over here there's a drinking age of 21, but we go to university at 18, right? And so I learned how to make beer, and in doing so, got really into the hobby. I know I actually know personally that you drink beer, Johnny and Katie, but have you guys ever made beer before? Just curious.
I have.
I have not.
But
So Katie, then, quiz time. What are the ingredients in beer making?
Oh, okay. Water, hops, yeast, and malt.
You got it. So there's four ingredients in beer. It's really an agricultural product. A lot of people don't really think about it like that. I certainly wasn't as an undergrad, but really enjoyed the process of making it, which involves heating water, mixing it with grains, kind of like making a big, bowl of porridge. But you're using like 30 pounds of grain to make, like 1/3 of one keg worth of beer. And to make the beer, you're extracting the sugars basically from that grain, and that's what ferments and becomes beer, which we were allowed to make legally, but not drink. And of course, we never drank it, but loved the process of making it.
Of course not. Of course, you never drank it.
Never, not once. So other people told us it was good, so we kept doing it. And the thing is, though, with every batch, you still have all of this grain, this malt. So what is malt? It's barley. It's sprouted. It's a sprouted ancient grain. They take barley, they soak it in water, they sprout it, it germinates the grain, and then they kind of like roast it, toast it, to get different colors, and that's why you get different colors of beer. And so in the beer making process, you're really concerned with extracting the fermentable sugars from the grain, but what's left is all the protein and fiber. And so every time I was making beer, it was like 1 pound of grain for every 6-pack, and I was left with all this food. So I was making beer and food really at the same time, but didn't have anything to do with the food. I grew up in Northern California with a vegetable garden in the backyard with compost, is something that I just assumed was available everywhere. I was at college at UCLA, still California, still very progressive, but at the time there wasn't like composting municipally. And so felt like I was throwing away food, because I was, every time I made a batch of beer. And so I had a bit of a light bulb moment where I realized, okay, what are other people doing with this? Found some recipes for bread and pizza dough and, other fun things. And I started making bread actually to sell to friends, which I would then use the revenue from that to brew beer for free. And that line of inquiry, that's really what led to what ReGrained has become. Today we have technology that's patented. We're an ingredient platform. We're working with huge food companies all over the world, major breweries. We're creating this new supply chain for the next generation of better for you and better for the planet products. But back then, really all I wanted to do was have my beer and, eat it too. And just kind of kept moving things forward. And it's been great and incredibly stressful and also horrible, but mostly great.
And so when you first made that bread from the what's the technical term, like residual ingredients of the beer brewing process?
Yeah, that works. Let's call it leftovers.
leftovers. Did you give it to your friends, and the first loaf they were just like, "Oh my goodness, this bread is amazing! It tastes like beer," or like, what was that kind of journey of discovery around actually turning the leftovers into something tasty and awesome?
Yeah, I mean, that's your nice way of asking if it tasted like a good idea or if it was a delicious product, right? And I think it was somewhere in between, So, I mean, you got to remember my first customers were not
drunk
the most
19-year-old.
I was gonna say not the most sober of adults, and so I was making fresh, like there's nothing better than fresh bread, right? Like straight out of the oven, and so I would make it. And people would just kind of smell it and come. I was living in a fraternity house at the time. I guess I left out that that detail in the story. And so I really had a constant supply of hungry, party animals around. Well, I didn't really have, farm animals to feed this to, like many breweries around the world did. And so, no, I mean, the bread was fine. Like it was good. I didn't really know what I was doing. No one does when they get started. And we started making bars after that because we wanted to make something that had more of a shelf life than one day. And we could make more than a dozen of it one time. We could make hundreds of them at one time. That was crazy back then. Because the idea was, hey, let's figure out if people will actually eat this stuff and actually think it tastes good, not just be a good idea. Let's see if there's a market for it, because the real potential here is to close the loop as an ingredient, because there's 1 pound of grain for every 6-pack of beer. That adds up to tens of billions of pounds of grain use just in the US alone. So we could be in $100 million snack company selling chips, bars, whatever, and work with 1, maybe 2 breweries. But to make an actual impact on this supply chain, put food to its best use, help create a food system that can do more with less, it's going to be by developing this new supply chain, selling it to their companies as an ingredient, kind of like an Intel Inside for food. We had that thought, way back at the beginning, but knew that we had to start somewhere. And so, creating the bread and then the bars, was really our way of doing that and doing some kind of revenue generating learning, if you will, where we could just take the cash flows from that, use it to buy more ingredients. It was very small, very part-time for a number of years. It wasn't until 2017 that I actually formally hired myself, I guess late 2016. And this is made the first loaf of bread in 2011. So that's, we had a bit of an organic start, if you will.
Yeah. So at what point did you run out of supply of your own leftovers? And what was it like approaching your first brewery or a couple breweries saying like, hey, can I use this or buy this from you? I want to make food out of it.
Yeah. And we have permission to dive in your dumpster. No, just kidding. We weren't actually, we've of course set up, the way we work today is we have a fully food safe, like we worked actually with the USDA. That's how we developed our process. And we have a patent around how we do that from a processing standpoint, and our relationship with the breweries are very tight knit. Early on, it actually happened a lot sooner than we thought we would in terms of like needing to find another supply of grain. It was hard to fathom because 1 pound for every 6-pack of beer. I mean, you can kind of understand that conceptually, but when you see it, and Katie, you've made beer, like there's a lot that's used, and it did not think we would really run out of our own. So the original idea was like, hey, we'll be a brewery that's also this food company, kind of do both at the same time. One of the challenges with this grain, though, is that it actually spoils really, really quickly. So when it comes out of the brewery, it's like 90% water. It's soaking wet. It'll spoil very fast unless you freeze it or dry it. And so what we had started doing, we got in this rhythm where we'd spend 1 whole weekend making our bars. And then we'd spend another whole weekend selling them, like farmers markets and things like this, really just getting out there and trying this. And we were preparing for our first festival, actually doing it. It was the Kern County Nut Festival in 2012. Bakersfield, California. It was their first annual Kern County Nut Festival.
You really wanted to launch with a bang, yeah? You really just wanted to go big right out the gate.
You
This
know,
is like the pre-Expo West. You got to start at the Kern County Festival.
So, and you know, these days we are really nostalgic for festivals, right? And often I just think back to that Kern County Nut Festival. Like, man, I can't wait till I can go back to the Kern County Nut Festival. No, so the connection there actually was that we were also doing direct sourcing at the time, so we were using almonds and honey in our bars, and we had a farmer that was just supplying us both the almonds and the honey. It was one like family farm, and they told us about this festival that was coming up. Like, yeah, this could be a good like low risk place to try this product. And so we were prepping. We had no idea how many bars people would buy at this. I think we were selling them for like, I don't know, 2 for $6 or 2 for $5, something like that. And we realized we didn't have enough grain to actually make enough inventory for this weekend. And so I started cold calling, breweries around, and actually found that brewers are are very supportive of what we are doing now and what we were starting to talk about doing then. It's been kind of this latent opportunity, I guess, in the space for a long time. We've been making beer for as long as humans have, not been nomadic, right? Like we didn't want to carry around these vats of beer anymore. And so we started, and we needed to stay in one place to grow the grain in order to do it. So we're talking millennia, of this tradition of beer making. And it's always been used yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, you go.
Well, I was going to just like to share the history of it with brewers. Like it's always been used for often used for animal feed. That's kind of been the easiest thing to do with it. But especially as like the brewing industry got more commercialized, and as urban breweries started opening up more and more. I mean, this is something that people have been saying, like, why can't we do something better with this? Good analog to think of is like whey protein, WHEY, right? That you see as a supplement. That's actually made at the same time that cheese is made. It's a byproduct of the cheese making process. And decades ago, it had a very similar challenge in the industry. Like, how do you get rid of this stuff, basically? And it got turned into something that's so value added that there's actually now whey producers where cheese is the byproduct, right? And so
no way.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
Way. Yeah, you got me. Yeah, so that's never heard that one before. Definitely never used that one. So that's the brewers were stoked, about what we were doing, and what we're really trying to do.
And why were they stoked? Were they stoked because, like, they kind of think, well, this is like, not that sustainable, or you kind of, it's sad that we're wasting this from a kind of, environmental impact, or is there some like economic upside to them?
It's a little bit of both, so like brewers are not wasteful. Brewers are actually great environmental stewards. Beer, we were talking about this, a bit earlier, like beer is an agricultural product. It takes a lot of resources, to make beer. About 90% actually of the water footprint of beer is in the agricultural supply chain of the grain itself. Breweries have an incentive also to be energy efficient in everything that they do, because that actually directly impacts the cost, as well. And especially craft brewers, I mean, there tends to be a lot of values alignment with, environmentalism. There's just not a way. I sometimes hate using talking about waste, with what we're doing, because it's not that there's an action. It's not that a decision is creating waste that could have been avoided. It's just that there's 2 products that are made every time this process happens, and one of them isn't getting put to best use. And so we're here saying, hey, like, here's a better use for how to do this. We cracked the code on how to actually make it commercially viable. And so philosophically, what we find is that the brewers are very excited, about what we're doing, and the brewery owners, and we've had brewery owners invest in us, as a result of that. Now, the long-term hope is that as we develop the market for this, it can create some financial upside for them too. If we're able to create a robust market for ingredients made from their byproduct, they can make an investment in our technology, and they can kind of create this, take something that was otherwise best case selling for like fractions of a cent per pound, just to make sure that someone come pick it up, more often than not giving it away for free, in some cases paying to have it hauled away, into something, so instead of being like a risk and a cost center, potentially like turn it into something that's all upside, so there wasn't a lot of reason really for the breweries to, well, let's put it differently. There was a lot of reasons for the breweries to be excited about, what we're building, and about the, potential long-term impact. And like, look, we're not even at the point today where we're taking 100% of a single brewery's annual output. There's just so much of it's metric crap loads, as I like to say, crap tons. It's there's like just so much of it available that we really we've got our work cut out for us in terms of
can you
making a dent on that.
Well, on the subject of breweries, have you thought about this, or and I would love to get more into the kind of B2B business model as well, but like it would be cool to have like Anchor Steam branded bread, or like Deschutes, or even like beer like branded CPG products. Have you like gone in that direction or considered that?
Yeah, when we have a few active projects, in that space, it's interesting with the like breweries that are going into non-alcoholic, like snack items and things like that. For some, is more feasible than for others, and so part of what we do also is help find the right partners, on the commercial side. So it might not just be ReGrained in a brewery; it might be ReGrained and an existing CPG brand and a brewery, and helping put the pieces together on some sort of like co-branded project. And so it's something that we're definitely doing, and it's got its audience, for that. I mean, think like every brewery, like if they could have their own pizza crust, for example, things like that. I mean, it gets pretty exciting thinking about that. But the broader market potential for this ingredient is even more staggering. I mean, this could be used in virtually any baked item that you can think of. It's got a ton of applications in snacks. We've even had like Buy Right Creamery here in San Francisco. They made an ice cream with it. We've had plant-based meat companies using it as a binder extender, in some trials to, for their meat analogs. I mean, there's really a lot of ways that it can be used, and not all of those will have beer as something that creates like a positive impression for all customers. It can be alienating, right? To be like, oh, does this have alcohol in it? Does it taste like beer? Is it bitter like hops? Can I give this to my kids? Right. So there's definitely an audience for the beer positioning, and we used to use the tagline "Eat beer" and everything. I mean, it's super super fun. I still have that on t-shirts. But we're really excited about the more broad market application potential for this ingredient, how it can be used in virtually every aisle of the grocery store.
Yeah, can we dig more into the B2B like ingredient side? Because I know you helped co-found, or you solely founded, the Upcycled Food Association. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your vision for upcycling in general, but also kind of like your ReGrained ingredient taking over the world, and where you'd like to see it most implemented.
Yeah, totally. So for the Upcycled Food Association, that was ReGrained and a handful of other brands under the leadership of the individual who's the CEO and founder, and co-founders actually, Ben and Turner, and that was ReGrained, and then Barnana, Renewal Mill, Perfect Foods, a handful of us that were really early on this trend decided, hey, let's come together and let's create a center of gravity for the rest of the movement. With the term upcycled food was one that actually both ReGrained and Barnana kind of coined in parallel. We're trying to solve, both of us, I think we're trying to solve the conundrum of like, how do we message what this is from a sustainability perspective that's not
right.
Wait, doesn't sound like waste, right? No one wants to eat waste. So you're going to yuck the yum of the customer. Mm-hmm. So there's like, it's not you don't want to call it recycled, repurposed.
Did you just say you yuck the yum of the customer?
Yeah.
Your turn of phrase, man. It's been absolutely fire so far. Keep going. Keep going with your yucking of the yum.
Yeah, I can't wait to let you down from here. That's all I got. No, so we needed like a positive way to talk about this, and the challenges with the term like upcycling, it requires education, right? Because this is a new term. The word upcycled was something that I learned from my sustainability studies. If you we read like Bill McDonough's Cradle to Cradle and some of these other texts that talk about like circular design. It's mostly been applied until we started using it to like building materials or apparel, that's kind of where the word was rooted. And so we took that and said, hey, well, what about like edible upcycling, right? What about upcycling food? And that kind of caught on. It required some education, but it clicked once you explained it to people. And Barnana kind of found the same thing, and it's become it's funny because upcycling is kind of having its moment this year in 2020. But we've been, it's like one of those, 10-year overnight successes for a term like that. And there's still a long way to go with consumers and getting them to understand it. But it's something now that's made the top 10 trend list, for example, for Whole Foods. They named upcycled foods. As one, and this organization now, we've got almost 150 members. We've got a certification standard that's been formally written by a panel of a committee, I guess, of experts. I think there's 16 of them that spent 7 months developing a standard to certify products as upcycled against. We ratified that as a board a few weeks ago, and later this quarter, actually, we're going to roll out the beta program of actually certifying products as being upcycled, which is very much in line with the original vision here, which is like, how can we use business as a force for good? In this case, food waste, incredibly pressing issue, one of the most important levers we have against the climate crisis, and this is by creating a movement around like doing more with less. I mean, the other thing is, this is not the thing that I guess I really like to point out is that this is not the most crazy innovative idea you can think of. Like, let's do more with less. Duh, right? I mean, like, look, there's so many examples of, we talked about whey earlier, and there's other examples that you could argue are upcycled just without being marketed in that way. One of my favorite examples is baby carrots. Baby carrots aren't little tiny carrots that get harvested, right? They start as big, cosmetically imperfect carrots that were shaved down to be more attractive to the consumer. You got some people who might argue that you could say like a hot dog is upcycled, which isn't the most savory of examples to dive into. How the sausage gets made, so to speak. That one's for you, Johnny.
Appreciate that.
But there's really this philosophy behind upcycled foods that I think is important, where it's like, okay, this isn't just about making sure that we're squeezing as much profit as possible out of every process, but it's also about accomplishing some environmental outcomes, right? And there's this environmentalism behind the upcycled food movement that I think is really a defining characteristic of it. And ReGrained is, of course, I feel is like the quintessential example of that. So we've got this kind of hybrid business model where we've got these consumer packaged goods. We used to have bars, we stopped making those, but we've got these chips. They're kind of like a puffed sun chip that's out in the market now as a way to teach consumers, hey, you can, this is what the stuff tastes like. These are the nutritional properties, get pumped about it. But then there's also this whole bigger model around, okay, selling the ingredient to other companies, B2B. And so like our vision is not to have ReGrained products made by ReGrained in every aisle of the grocery store, but to be selling to all the different food manufacturers and various operators in the space that are responsible for doing a product development innovation and bringing products to market around this new ingredient. It's like, what did it look like when quinoa was first brought to the North American market, right? Or stevia's, another example of new ingredients. So like, how can we do this really deliberately for supply chains that by inherently growing sales, we're also putting resources to their best use by feeding people, by going straight to the top of the food recovery hierarchy.
And so you're basically go ahead, Katie.
I was just going to say, are you finding a lot of these larger ingredients companies like really latching on to this idea and finding placements in their products and in their kind of pipeline, or what's like the biggest sticking point for people with introducing this new ingredient?
Yeah, there's a lot of interest. We've got a lot of really exciting active projects going. The big challenge, it's really a cash flow challenge for a business, like ours. So we have, projects that we're working on that are going to be 2 years from the point that they were even approved. So it might be longer, if you count like when we were actually courting, the relationship before they start generating revenue. So it takes a long time for, bigger food products to get launched. Even small, we're working with some smaller food companies too, that are a little bit more agile. The fastest one is going to still take 9 months. And that's like sprinting, no one does that, bringing a product to market that fast. And well, some people do. We're actively looking for those those owners and innovation departments that are willing to commercialize products faster, but it can be a very long process, even if there's a lot of alignment and excitement around it. And part of the other thing to kind of comment on here is that where we're at with the development of consumer awareness around upcycled foods is that it's still, I describe it more as a reason for loyalty than a reason for purchase too. So while, our key differentiator in getting interest within the industry can be like, hey, this is, this get on board with the upcycled food trend. When it comes to actually commercializing products, that doesn't mean that every product is going to have upcycled big front and center, on it. It could be a product that's just, it's, you got to win on taste, right? I mean, and the nutritional differentiation. So like we're working on a bread that's going to be, better nutritionals, and has unique flavor profile. And, oh, by the way, it's also upcycled, right? And so there's kind of an element of that too, where we're, and they'll reach a tipping point, if we're successful, where there will be potentially like a whole, end cap at the store where it's all the different upcycled products from different parts of it. And that can be a reason for purchase. But, there's also this element of like, how can we make the right thing, the easy thing for people by creating great tasting products that are like awesome nutritionally, better for you, not just like less bad. Maybe they're actually good for you. Maybe they deliver fiber in a way that's, helps people actually like get enough fiber in their diet. Almost no one gets enough fiber in their diet. And
that was a powerful slide in your presentation, because if you think about organic, right, which like obviously you would love to be organic, right? If upcycled was like kind of organic, and you think back to where organic was, I don't know what it was, 10, 15, 20 years ago when it first came on, and it was like super expensive. No one was doing it. And now like it's just the percentage of groceries that are produced to organic. It'd be interesting to track that over time. But it's very emphatically better for the consumer, right? It's like the messaging is like reinforced. This is like healthier, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas you don't necessarily have that, or at least the kind of primary kind of motivator, it looks like, is like, this is better for the environment rather than better for me as a consumer. But there was a slide in your WeFunder campaign, and this we can seamlessly segue into talking about that as well. But where you did talk about, I think, like added fiber in ReGrained's grain, super grain, which if you can try to check both those boxes, right? Of better for the environment, but also better for you as a consumer. To your point, like that's how you get people to try it in the first place, or that's how you acquire new customers, and then the environmental positive impact can kind of drive loyalty over time.
Totally. I mean, if you think about, if you just shift like to a different industry entirely and think of like the automobile industry and Tesla as an example, like people aren't buying Tesla cars because they're electric. Right. They're buying them because they're fast, beautiful cars, right? So what's the equivalent for food?
Exactly.
It's great tasting, healthy products that, happen to be more sustainable. So for us, I mean, that's why if you look at like our trade name for our ingredient, for the upcycled grain ingredient, is Super Grain Plus. And that's, sure, it's a mouthful, right? But, it tells a pretty, or at least hints at a pretty clear story. One is like, as a super grain, you're expecting it to be better nutritionally. And then you dig in, you earn that double click, right? By building the intrigue, and you click in, you say, oh, this has like substantially more dietary fiber than even whole wheat. It's got, as much protein as an almond. It's got prebiotic properties that support, gut health. Like this is a veritable super grain. And then the plus we did deliberately too, like not because it's a mouthful or because it necessarily looks good, written there, although I do think it looks kind of cool. On a nutritional label, when you read like ReGrained Super Grain Plus, that plus can then be brought down below the nutrition facts panel and can be used to explain this plus means upcycled, right? Just like you see the asterisk for organic. And so, there's, elements of incorporating, kind of what you're talking about into how we can layer, our storytelling, on package, for the customer.
Yeah. And so transitioning to the campaign. So, and maybe would love to take it back actually. So the first time I chatted with you, I think I just joined WeFunder. I think it was Arno Hess, maybe at Food Funded, that had introduced us, and you'd recently done a crowdfunding campaign with another platform. So can you maybe walk us right back to the start of your journey with regulation crowdfunding. Like, why did you decide to raise funds in this way? And then maybe talk about that campaign. And then, we were chatting for 2 or 3 years before you then kind of launched another campaign with us. So I guess I'm curious about the whole kind of journey of your experience with raising money from, unaccredited investors as well as accredited investors.
Yeah. I think we. I don't know if we met at this or around this time, but we actually were on a panel together where we were talking about regulation crowdfunding, and because we were one of the first food companies that I know of to do it from the regulation CF from non-accredited investors. My interest as a leader in equity crowdfunding, originates at just interest in triple bottom line business and mission aligned. Both strategic capital, but also mission aligned capital. And for us, the first time around, we were thinking about building a capital stack, that incorporates elements of strategic investors, that can bring value add, right, and also ways to make sure that we're going to preserve our mission across the long run. And I actually think I would argue equity crowdfunding is both strategic and mission aligned.
I would argue it's value add too.
Yeah, and I can get into that as well, especially now that we've had 2 successful rounds with this. We've got now over 1,000 investors from Regulation CF crowdfunding. But we wanted to. We're very excited by the idea of hey, what would it look like if our customers could invest in us, if our community could invest in us? This whole idea of democratizing, and you guys do a great job educating people about this idea of democratizing venture capital, right? And it was very, very compelling from a mission standpoint. And I thought, okay, best case, this goes well. Then we also have this group of hundreds of people that are literally invested in our success. And so when we do new retail launches, or we want to test new product positioning, or there's all these different ways that you can then engage this group of highly motivated individuals that are literally invested in your business with you.
Do you have a tangible example of that you've seen?
So we actually rebranded in between the first equity crowdfunding campaign and the second one. When we were doing that rebrand, and if you look up, do the Google time machine or whatever for what ReGrained looked like. It's a radical departure from how we used to present ourselves. And we knew that we were taking some risk, in doing that. There's a reason why we wanted to really change how we were, positioning this. But we had a few directions we wanted to explore, and weren't, as a small company, you can't really afford actual market research. You can't, focus groups and things like that. That's tens of thousands of dollars best case. And so what we did is actually took the list of equity crowdfunding people and sent out. It's not rocket science, we sent out some of the prototype designs and collected feedback and used that to inform future decisions. Or when we launched a new product line, we launched it privately to the equity, crowdfunding people first, and got, feedback and product reviews, and asked them to send to friends, and, things like that. So there's, I think, a lot of really interesting ways from the kind of the marketing and consumer research side of what you're doing, where you can engage this community literally that you're building around your business, as opposed to having 5 or 6 venture capitalists. You've got access to hundreds of people. People are always afraid too, oh, okay, well, so am I going to get all these demands from a person that invested $100 in my business? And I think it's all about setting expectations and making sure everything gets set up correctly too. But it's been very helpful, for us, and it's one of the reasons why I like to champion this. Is I think it's a really great way to incorporate your stakeholders, as shareholders.
Yeah. So who are the ReGrained investors? Who did you reach out to? Is it mostly friends? Is it mostly family and extensions of the founding team's personal network? Or were you, building from your e-commerce list? How did you reach out, and who who are like your most active sort of demographics within this 1,000-person community?
Yeah, I mean, kind of all the above. So like the first time around, we raised about 700,000 from about 700 people. So our average check size is about 1,000.
Okay.
The second time around, which we just concluded in December with WeFunder, which was, I have to say, I was incredibly impressed with your team and just the whole experience of doing it. It was night and day actually compared to the first crowdfunding campaign from like an organization and support standpoint, and very grateful for everything WeFunder contributed to our second campaign being as successful as it was. We had to cap.
What address do you want us to send the check to you again,
the second campaign, we were actually limited in what we could raise based on some of the regulations, at the time. And so the strategy was a little bit different. We were, because we were going to cap, what the total raise was. But the first, second time around, the first thing what we learned the first time around and really implemented well, I think the second time around should be key for anyone listening to this, is like, it's critical to prime the pump, of the campaign. And so in both campaigns, we released them privately for an undetermined amount of time, honestly, initially, but before it's kind of a judgment call, like, hey, we're going to flip this switch to public when we feel like it's the right time to do it, as opposed to just going public, right away, which enabled us to test our messaging, get new questions answered in the FAQ that had been missed before, which can then save time on actually moderating the campaign itself. Right. There's just so many benefits to actually testing something before you launch it publicly. And not the least of which with equity crowdfunding is that you can get more, really hit the ground running from a, kind of a fresh eyes perspective. So someone sees your page, they see that you already have some validation from people that have done their diligence, and it can, it's a complete game changer. And so the first time around, that meant, releasing it to, like friends and family, but also to this broader, I've always been pretty diligent about keeping people informed about the business over the years. And so there's kind of this inner circle of informal advisors, that we'd send it to and ask them to send it to some people and get feedback. And, you always, you ask for advice if you want people to invest, right? So hey, check this out. What do you think? And then, those folks end up investing. It's a really great place too. The first time around, one of the reasons we did it was, we noticed that we had, I had people saying that they were interested in investing, and we'd get into it, and they were either not an accredited investor, or maybe they were, but they were new to, angel investing, and maybe they were only interested in investing a few $1,000s, which is very cumbersome from a administrative perspective to do. And so getting this live gives you somewhere to just point them, and it aggregates it, and so it makes it make sense for the first time. Also, and I did this more actually both times. It just was different because of COVID. But the first time was, timed around a lot of events. So I was doing some pitches and things like that. And it was, so I'd have the opportunity to give a presentation and say, oh, and by the way, you can go to this URL and check out more about the business and actually, own our mission and our success with us. And the WeFunder side of things.
And I think it's really, the fact that you kind of have contributed, I feel like, I don't know what the word is, just almost to build this upcycling segment or movement. Industry, right? And you've movement. Thank you. You've been doing this obviously, it's in the interest of ReGrained, but you've been doing it because you believe in it, and it's really, really cool. You're talking about mission-aligned investors. I feel like you've now reaped what you've sown, to continue the food analogy here, where, I feel like the investors in ReGrained, probably both round one and round two, are saying, I catch the vision. If you haven't seen Dan's TED Talk, by the way, if you're listening to this, it's really, really awesome, painting the vision. And I feel like you're kind of, the investments you've seen, a lot of that probably partly is that kind of, people don't, buy what you do, they buy what you do it. one thing I want to just go back to is what you're saying about the private versus public launch, because this is something I'm encouraging founders to do all the time, and I don't think people do it enough. I think they always want to come out of private like as soon as possible, and I get it, because like then you can raise more money from your Facebook post and your LinkedIn post and your email blast, and then you can raise more money from the WeFunder investors. But I think you really nailed it, where it's like, no, you want to stay in private kind of as long as possible, because the more you've raised in private, the more emphatic the bang of your launch is going to be. So can you just talk a little bit more about that? Like, how did you know to do that? Did you get that advice, or what advice would you give to other founders considering doing a WeFunder campaign in that regard?
Yeah, I completely believe it's one of the single most important strategies for having a successful campaign. And I get the temptation to want to try. You put so much. It's preparing for anyone who hasn't done it before. Right. Listening to this, like preparing for this type of campaign has as much diligence, if not more, as raising from like a much later stage venture capital group, right? Like you really, and as it should be, like you've got to have your stuff together to basically make a somewhat of a public offering of an early stage business. And you put in all this work, you make this great video, you work on all this messaging, maybe you spent weeks on it, maybe you spent months on it, depending on how far ahead you planned, and you want to turn it on, and just like you built it and they're going to come, right? And there's this like temptation to do that, and I think it can work, and but I really advise against it because of everything that you just said, Johnny. And I think it's much more effective to get, murdering these food puns, right? It really is like, this isn't even a pun, it's just a metaphor. Like this is a farming process. Like you are farming this offering. Like you've got to plant the seed with your early group, and you've got to kind of, there's a whole funnel that you can get through, and you're going to get much better at it over time too, as you improve your page and as you add more videos. Or we recorded it was a webinar. I did a private webinar while the campaign was still in private. This was the second time around with our equity crowdfunding investors. The first time around, invited them to it, and I think we had a couple hundred people register, something like that. It got recorded, got posted on the page, right, so that other people could look at it later. And you can, do things like that, because it's going to take a few touch points to get the investors to convert. And then the more you have in there, then there's a more reason really to trust the offering for investors that are maybe looking more just to find deals that are already validated, that are ideas that they believe in. And then it'll be a faster process for them too. So it kind of creates this pinwheel. And by the end of the campaign, we weren't hardly doing anything but refreshing the page and watching, more money. Right. Show up in it, and we hit our max, and that was only happened because of the how I think the conditions that we set up together. And it was a team effort. John, you asked like how we knew to do this. I don't know how often you hear from other founders, after you they agree to do a campaign, but like you and I were checking in all the time. I was checking in with different people on the WeFunder team all the time, like how are we benchmarking against other metrics? What can we be doing that's more? Are there any groups that you've met recently that are interested in looking at WeFunder deals while they're still private, right? Like I was some version of a squeaky wheel, I think, throughout this process, which sorry, Johnny and Katie, who encourages this, but like everyone should really be, see WeFunder as your partner in doing this, because everyone wants to have a successful campaign. And like, no, not every opportunity is going to be right for everyone in terms of like being on different, I don't know, email lists or whatever. Like there's criteria, for that kind of stuff, as there should be. But basically the way I see it is like the more time you give yourself to get this thing going, you're giving yourself more opportunities to like be lucky, right, and getting your message in front of the right person at the right time later on. And you got to kind of take the long view, I think, with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up the momentum, because we talk about that all the time, that you really do have to put some effort into it and farm your own community. I also loved that reference at the beginning most often, and then it really does snowball and become sort of its own thing, its own living thing. So yeah, you mentioned a couple, some pros, some cons, but what would you say for food and beverage companies specifically are like the major pros and cons of looking at equity crowdfunding?
Yeah. One other point, actually, on that other thing we were talking about, we had one investor come in. I think they came in with like a $10,000 or $20,000 check towards the end of the campaign that had received. They were on the list of people that had received things, in the pre-launch, right? So it took the entire duration of the campaign and those touch points to actually, and then the investment was significant. As a result of that, it's like completely worthwhile. It's just some people take their time with this kind of thing, and you got to meet people where they are. In terms of pros and cons, it's more like caveats, maybe, for doing this. Like, should I do equity? I get asked this all the time. Like, should we do equity crowdfunding? We saw ReGrained's success on doing this. Like, that looks great. Should we do it? And, usually my answer is yes, but like, let me ask you a few questions, first, because it does take time to set it up and it takes time to manage and market it. As a founder, one of your most important things is to remember that like most good ideas fail because they run out of money. Right. And so like if one of our most important jobs is making sure we bring capital into this. So I think it's really time well spent, but there's kind of this big uncertainty around what kind of success you'll have on there. And there's some science, like we were talking about with priming the pump and getting momentum, around doing this, but there's also a lot of art to it too. And no two campaigns, I think, are going to be exactly the same. And so you have to be willing to try, a bunch of stuff and take the time, to do that. Another caveat
one thing that just on that note, I don't know if you are aware of this, but the law is changing next month, March 15th, where companies now are going to be able to raise $5 million per year versus $1.07 million per year. And then relevant to what you just said, like I think you used the phrase like there's no science around how much you can raise, right? Which like it's very difficult to predict, right, ahead of time how much money you're going to be able to raise. But with testing the waters changes, now founders before they file a Form C are going to be able to reach out to people, customers, let's say, or social media, and try to gauge interest ahead of filing the Form C, which was maybe not scientific, but certainly significantly increase their confidence. So I think this will actually really help to kind of lower the barrier to entry. Maybe for founders that are kind of apprehensive about, is this going to work? This is a brilliant way of essentially trying to feel out whether it's going to be a good fit.
Yeah, I think those are totally game-changing regulation changes to this. So that's I'm really glad you.
And the other thing I just wanted to ask, based on what you just said with the timing, I had an interesting conversation with Maxime Tuchman from Caribou on this. She raised $1.7 million because she was talking about the effort, and obviously don't want to discount that. Usually, sometimes, Lost Spirits raise $1 million very quickly, but for the most part, it's going to be work, and you're going to have to work it and hustle. But how does it compare to if you look to raise that money just kind of by pitching angels or, family offices and institutions?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that also takes a lot of time, right? And so that's why, like, I always tell people to think about this as a part of their capital stack, and you can, for me, both times we did it, the thinking was, okay, if this is really successful, it takes pressure off the rest of that stack and we can have more of it. Like, I have no issue with more of it being attributed to, the equity crowdfunding. And if it doesn't, if we raise less than we were hoping to, then we're still going to be in the same position we were going to be in before, we did this, but we have the benefit of having all of our documents together, our story, tight and everything ready to, ready to go in that respect. And so I think that the other, related to this is most people, including we have a great attorney group that we work with. Hopefully everyone has good attorneys for their businesses, right? Like there's a lot of risk aversion around this new form, relatively new form of raising capital. And I get a lot of people saying, hey, my lawyer says I shouldn't do this. My lawyer says I shouldn't do this. It's like, our lawyer said we shouldn't do it either, but then I asked why. And it was mostly just because this was so new that, there's less examples of like what it's going to look like across long term. They'd say, oh, and there's no validity to this. Like, you should always, this is why you pay your lawyers way too much money. But say, okay, well, what about, for future financing rounds, our venture capital groups, traditional VC money is going to see this as a bad thing, there's things like that. But honestly, for us, like the first time we raised on our equity crowdfunding camp platform, it actually brought in a new capital partner, because they saw that we were raising, and they were a strategic investor that saw the campaign. They did some of their additional diligence there. We had a pilot project going on with them, on the side, and they're like, hey, they literally said, hey, can we invest in you? Well, let's talk about it, and that came as after we had the equity. So I think it can go both. I think it can go both ways. In terms of that. And I don't know. It's just like, if you're like, do you care about involving your stakeholders, and giving them the opportunity to be shareholders? Do you have a problem with being transparent about your financials? Like, we had to publicly post a pretty massive loss, on our financial statements, largely attributed to this compostable packaging failure that cost the business almost $1 million. It was a big problem for us. But, when you're privately held, like startup company, you don't usually disclose financials publicly, and you got to be transparent with your financials for this. But I think that and maybe this is just naive, being naive as a first-time founder. I don't know. I mean, I don't think so. I think there's also benefit to being transparent, and for mission-driven businesses, I think that can be really key. The other thing that doesn't get talked about enough, and maybe WeFunder does a good job of talking about this, I'm not sure. From an equity, perspective, I'm a privileged white man, right? Like, I know that, and that's, there's a whole issue of equity and access and VC money and, just traditional fundraising.
Just to be clear, by equity here, you're talking about equality and equity of opportunity as opposed to shares in a company.
Yeah, diversity, equity, inclusion, that side of, I guess when we're talking about equity crowdfunding, that bears mentioning. I think there's this element of equity crowdfunding that actually supports, the other type of equity that we're talking about here, where it really levels the playing field and opens up a practical way for a founder's community, to invest in them and make it so that it's not just, the tiny percentage of decision makers that exist in traditional finance, investing. And depending on your business, again, it might make sense to have both on the table. But I think there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity for mission-driven founders, for founders of color, for female founders, for and again, I know I don't even know if the video on this is going to be posted. Like, I am a white dude, like I get that, and I'm not saying that I'm an expert, in this, but I think that it's there's a lot of founders out there that are not, getting the same, getting enough access to conversations about getting funding for their great ideas. And I think, with equity crowdfunding, it really levels the playing field in an exciting way. That's, it's truly the democratization of capital, and, that deserves to be acknowledged, I think.
For sure. Yeah, for founders and investors, like, I love that as you're building this movement, you're really inviting people who care about upcycling and who care about reducing food waste to really join in on potentially sharing the upside of their, good natured investment into really wanting to support this problem. So this is something we ask almost everyone. I think we're still asking, what would be your biggest advice that you would pass along to anyone doing an equity crowdfunding campaign?
Besides do it on WeFunder?
Oh yeah, we can cut it right there.
That's actually, we just got time for one piece of advice. That's it. Next question.
Thank you.
Besides doing it on WeFunder.
Oh man.
No, I mean, I think we talked about, most of the other pieces of advice. I would echo a lot of, what we're talking about with, priming the pump and, not being too take kind of a long view of building this campaign. This is not the kind of thing to do in like 2 months. I mean, you could probably pull it off, but it's better to plan ahead, have it be a part of your capital stack, be patient with it, consider doing multiple closes, that sort of thing. But, truly, like earnestly, the WeFunders, you guys have your stuff together. And I think it's great that anyone who's looking to do equity crowdfunding in general is looking to do, help lift that tide of equity crowdfunding. But we had a phenomenal experience working with WeFunder and the platform, and that's one of the reasons why I agreed to do this. In addition to it just being fun, chatting with you guys.
Thanks for that addition.
Yeah, awesome, man.
It being fun.
Dan, it's been such a pleasure to have you on, man. It's been a pleasure to work with you through the whole campaign. I think both Katie and myself, we worked at Kiva before. We're both pretty mission driven. I think all of us at WeFunder are. And so, to work not just with awesome founders, but people that are trying to do a really, really good thing. And I think often for social entrepreneurs, sometimes it might be harder for them to raise capital, because if you start using the word social impact on Sand Hill Road, you probably get some frowns and quizzical looks. So I think there's actually a good product market fit oftentimes for social entrepreneurs like yourself as well. But supporting founders like you and companies like ReGrained is basically why we work for WeFunder, and I think why WeFunder exists. So yeah, it was a pleasure to work with you. Hopefully we'll get to do it again sometime, and best of luck. Keeping on growing both ReGrained and the upcycling movement.
Thank you, Johnny. Thanks, Katie. Cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys. Bye. Guys, sorry, my delay was like so annoying. It was like, that was much more awkward than it should have been because of the 3-second delay, which hopefully we can polish some of that in editing, but it made it slightly more disjointed, so I apologize. But overall, I thought that was really awesome.
Sorry for being so long-winded.
No, I think it was good.
Yeah. I was going to say, sorry for going over time, but I think you're definitely to blame for that, Dan. So my conscience is clean on that. But man, this was honestly a super inspiring conversation. Normally these are shorter, but I don't know about you, Katie, but for me it was just awesome to just hear you. It's just such a fascinating business journey, but also mission, and your experience on 2 platforms. And I think the private public thing was a great insight. I don't think anyone's shared on the podcast before. So I think it was a really rich conversation. So
yeah,
and I would have, just so you guys know, I would have been doing way more puns. There were so many, seed capital. I was just waiting. I was you could probably see me. I was grinning, but I didn't want to do it because I knew that by the time I said the pun, the conversation would have moved on, and then I would have interrupted you, and it would have been awkward. So, it was so frustrating to have these amazing puns and just not be able to insert them.
We can think of a good title, Johnny. A good title pun.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks so much, man. This was awesome. We'll be in touch soon.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, guys, and we'll chat soon.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Adventure Capital. We hope you enjoyed that, and if you did, leave a review and stay tuned for the next one. Thank you so much. Have a great day.